You're listening to SaskScapes, a podcast featuring the stories of arts, culture, and heritage in Saskatchewan. Just past the Fort Qu'appelle Museum, on the other side of Echo Lake, is the village of Fort San, the home of the Heritage Landmark Sanatorium. It's also the home of Fort San Mayor Jim Harding. Thanks to Jim for introducing me to my guests I spoke with in SaskScapes Podcast Episode 14. Jim is a man with a strong environmental conscience, a passion for saving Saskatchewan's heritage buildings, and a wealth of knowledge on the history of the area. You'll find many of Jim's publications and blogs online. Jim comes from a background influenced by artistic parents and family friends. Among those friends is one of Saskatchewan's art pioneers, the late Florence Bean James. My first podcast guest, Gene Freeman, in Episode 1, also spoke of the impact Florence had on the lives of so many. Jim and I sat in the living room of his staggeringly beautiful home as the sun set over Echo Lake, and Jim shared the exciting regrowth of Fort Qu'appelle's old Central School, now home of the Fort Qu'appelle Centre for the Arts. I'm Kevin Power, and this is Fort San Mayor Jim Harding. So now I'm sitting in the home of the mayor of Fort San, Mr. Jim Harding, who we heard from earlier today in another podcast. Jim, I'm sitting in your living room, which is absolutely stunning. Tell me first a bit about this house.
Well, we're in a hill on the north side of the Qu'appelle Valley, about halfway between the lake and the upper hills, so we can capture the sun through the windows. So in the winter, if it's 30 below and the sun's out, the house is 70 inside and there's no internal heat. So it's passive solar, which is underrated and underused. Uh-huh. You don't need to build a complex solar heating system if you use passive solar. And then a lot of it's recycled lumber, old posts and beams, and an awful lot, pretty much all the doors and all the sills are recycled out of old wood. I tried to combine the sort of energy efficiency with recycling and biodegradability. I tried to avoid every toxic material I could, and I finally had to give in on vinyl windows, because I was buying wood frame windows through the second system, which are mismeasured. They're good windows. They're just, I built the house around windows because you save money. And after a year and a half, I had 3. So I ended up using vinyl and doing wood.
So you're an environmentalist.
Yes, in terms of living in this coulee and how we're trying to grow food and the house, trying to lower the carbon impact. And then we have a combination of wind and solar, right, which we don't get all our electricity from, but we do really lower our footprint. And any excess that we don't use, if we're in a big wind at night, it goes down the grid and our neighbors are basically using it. It goes backwards on the... And SaskPower gives us credit. It's a net metering system. Right. It's not a highly progressive system like Europe, where they do feed-in tariffs to encourage small producers to overproduce to reduce the need for big plants. But it's a toe in the water, really. Saskatchewan's actually quite far behind on renewable energy.
And I should say, by environmentalist, I mean that in the most complimentary of terms.
Well, practically as well as otherwise.
Yeah.
And I designed this in my head over a long time because I taught environmental studies with a lot of really bright design people, including some engineers, some energy analysts, some really good people. And then I started thinking, how can I actually make this simple rather than complex? So I wanted it to be simple. I wanted to reuse materials. I wanted it to be connected to the environment. I didn't want to build a box of an efficient house that was ugly. And I wanted it to be connected to the environment. So this is what I did.
Again, so we're sitting at quite a nice elevation. What's the elevation here?
Well, we're about 1,600 above sea level in prairies.
Right. And
we're not expecting the floods to get this high.
No kidding. We're nestled again. Once again, here I am in hills, looking out over a stunning lake, gigantic.
This is Echo Lake.
Echo, yes, right. So apart from the odd duty as mayor, which I'm sure is time-consuming in and of itself.
And odd.
Yeah. You have a massive project on your hands on the other side of the lake, and that's where we did this morning's podcast, and that is the new art center being built in what was the old center school.
Old Central School.
Old Central School, dated 1911.
Right.
So we met Doreen this afternoon, who mentioned that she cornered you outside the washrooms of a local coffee house to say, you've got to help us save this school. Were you on board immediately?
Well, actually, she was. She didn't tell the whole story. She was slated for heart surgery. And she said, I'm not going to die until I'm sure that school is saved.
How could you say no?
So that was very compelling,
right?
Since she actually touches some of the same things in me that my mom did. You know, she's sort of an adopted mother now. I've got a lot of adopted mothers out here. Lorna, we'd known her through some other things. So, you know,
Lorna, her daughter.
Yeah, we'd known her. We're getting to know her and through the Kairos group and slowly. But no, she got me at a weak moment. My dog had just died, to be quite honest.
The dog that I saw in the photos there?
No, a later one. He had just died about a week before, and I was pretty hurting pretty badly. And I always look at that as Soup died just when we were digging the
Your dog's name was Soup.
Souk. From the Vancouver Islands.
Yes, I've been there.
And that's why we named him that, because we've been out celebrating our son's graduation from U of Vic. And we walked the Souk trails. That's the reason he ended up being named that way. So he got killed. Not sure what happened to him, but same time as we were putting the wind footing in, and this crisis and call for action on we're going to lose one of our landmarks all happened. So in my kind of memory, they're all kind of
so
intermixed.
You're grieving the loss of Souk, and there is Doreen clutching her chest saying, I'm not going to die. By the way, I'm about to have a heart surgery, but I'm not going until...
it was very compelling.
I can imagine.
And I was hungry, and they bought me soup.
Right, there you go.
They kept my attention.
Right. So that was...
They needed some help organizing the community. They didn't know it's not a technology community organizing, but there's a process if you want to do it right, and you have to get your information straight. So I interviewed them.
Right.
And then I went out and I answered the questions. I said, well, I need to know this, I need to know this. And they answered as much as they could on the history, on some architectural, some heritage contacts. She knew Curvemaker. That's how I got to know him, through her. And we wrote down these questions, and then we got enough good, solid information, and then we had an informal meeting, and 10 people turned up. Then we had another one a week later, 15 turned up. Then we had another one, 35 turned up. Right. Then we organized a petition, 220 people signed. Then we went to the town council and said, we think there's an alternative.
And you made a pretty good case to town council because...
we turned them around.
You turned them around.
Yeah.
And so
but they were interested in this.
Sure, this being money.
Yeah, and we said, of course, we're going to do a fundraising because this building can't be reused unless it's upgraded.
Right.
But we did the frugal upgrade with massive volunteer labor, including from some tradespeople, but most of it from people like our members. Mm-hmm. So we kept the costs down. Like that we've done what we've done now for about $125,000.
Right.
And anyone who came in there, for example, we did the electrical upgrade, we probably spent less than 10. When we had our first contractor came in using their model, he gave us an estimate of 35. And the way we did it is we rebuilt back whatever we could. Mm-hmm. We didn't tear walls out. We redid whatever was in, and it was code. We built on back, and then once we had it all down, then we got the town to put in the 220 amp system, and we put in a new box with our electrician, and it's just as good as if we'd torn the walls down and started from scratch.
So that started 3 years ago.
Yep.
And it's coming along nicely, coming along according to plan. And what's the hope, dreams, and aspirations of that building? What do you want to see
happen? The first thing we did before we even went after grants is we did a really thorough needs assessment in this whole region. We interviewed about 35 groups.
Right.
All the First Nations and Métis dance and arts groups, all the visual groups, the theater groups, and we asked them what they thought was needed and what wasn't, because we didn't want a duplicate. Mm-hmm. Given the nature of the space, the restrictions of the classroom design, we weren't going to tear down the building and put beams in.
Right.
We weren't going to destroy the building to make it the right space. We were going to use that space for what we could. That's why we ended up, everybody said, well, we have no place we can use as a gallery. Mm-hmm. We have no small meeting and multi-use performance rooms. We're starting to get rented by the Files Hill Health District for their meetings because we've got that room that can set up and they can cook their own food. So, there were a number, and then the dance studio, the potting was like right up there because the whole thing has collapsed in the community. There used to be the Hanson Ross potting, and he trained, and they had all the stuff there, and Ross died in a car accident, and Hanson's disabled. So we said, okay, we can do these things in this space. There's some things we can't do. We're not going to compete with others. Mm-hmm. So the larger performing venues, the Midsummer Arts people have developed in the fort, and they have big events there, and that's fine. And we have small 40, 50 performing sort of audiences. And once we had the vision of the best use of the space, then we had to grapple with the cross-cultural question. How are we going to ensure it's accessible to everyone, given that the schooling system was segregated historically?
Yeah.
There were First Nations and Métis kids in that school who were not in the residential school, obviously. And so it was a stereotype to say it wasn't a school that was multicultural. But Indian education on reserves is gaining grounds. There's the whole question of cultural appropriation, and we have found that this school is mostly valued by non-Indigenous families. Mm-hmm. They have more. There were no First Nations teachers at the time. In the public school system now there is. So we've grappled with that, and that's going to be
So what programming do you want to put in the center?
Well, we tried to partner on Treaty 4 days last year, and that didn't work out, but not because the people didn't want it, just because the people who were willing to do it couldn't. They were actually working out of town. And we'll keep working at doing partnering around Treaty 4 days, possibly a photography exhibit of the chiefs in the area that hasn't been shown publicly.
Right, because you'll have a gallery space in there.
Yeah. So, we'll keep working at that. And we've had 2 Pasquale Reserve residents on our board, and those connections are developing. They're developing actually not just through the arts, they're developing through water campaigns and a lot of other things in the community. So we decided we had to make the heritage the number one, saving the building and the heritage the number one objective, and then the energy upgrade for environmental as well as cost reasons, and then the reuse, phasing in the different rooms, and now 4 out of 5 spaces are being used.
Right.
And we're hoping to attract local artist co-op.
Yeah.
That could be self-organized using the space, because we don't want to create unnecessary organization if you can self-organize.
Right. And touring musicians.
Space
for them. Yeah.
We've got, and that's being used. We're hoping to have a room for people to stay overnight. And then if people were to run a week-long dance workshop or writer's workshop, there'd be a performer or writer in residence room. A small scale of the summer arts. This summer we've partnered with someone who's going to run summer school, and she's seeing how she's doing for uptake of probably kids of cottagers.
Yeah.
And so we thought we'd let her run that and see how it works. She's doing it for several weeks. And then assess how we could or couldn't facilitate it next year. But the goal would be to phase in some summer school of the arts, probably with kids during cottage time.
Right.
We don't have a residential system possible.
Right.
And just ease our way into it. And, we'll have the dance, Valley Dance, hopefully back in there in the fall. They used to use that building. And
now you could have saved the school and really converted it to anything.
There were others who were bidding once they decided who would have turned it into condos.
Right. Okay.
And we went out on those bids because there was stronger community support to reuse it for public use.
Right.
And privatizing it.
Do you have any kind of an arts background yourself that made you?
Hey, it's Kevin. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Just a quick reminder that the SaskScapes podcast is available for free on your favorite podcast app, or you can stream it from your browser. Check out the show notes for the link. On the SaskScapes homepage, you'll notice something new under the logo called SaskScapes Plus. You can't miss it. There's a big button saying support with a heart icon next to it. I'd love it if you could click on that button and help keep this podcast series going. When SaskScapes launched in May 2014, it was the first podcast in the province celebrating arts, culture, and heritage. In fact, you'd have been pretty hard-pressed to find any Saskatchewan podcasts. So I'd like to think that we paved the way. It's been because of your support that this podcast is now in its 9th year. Okay, that's it. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
Well, it's in the family.
Uh-huh.
Well, we were talking about Florence James. I mean,
Yeah.
this lady who used to yell at me when I was a teenager upstairs and convinced me to come to writer's workshop was the pioneer of the Saskatchewan Arts Board.
Yes.
And the Summer School of the Arts. So she dragged me out to that.
And what was that writing course with?
With W.O. Mitchell.
Right.
And he was not successful in convincing me to write a different way. Although I think I always, under the surface as a researcher, was working with imagery. I used to always have trouble with editors because they wanted me to take description down to the bare bones, and I said, if there's not something on the bones, there's nothing to talk about.
I promise you're not the first writer to grapple with their editors.
No, and then leaving the university where you're kind of forced into a granting system and a publishing system, and as a social science researcher, you're still creative.
Right.
And sometimes, and you're embellishing, but there are some standards, and I believe in them, around validity and reliability and that stuff. When I left there and I starting writing columns, and I had free rein, I realized that discipline made me a better journalist or whatever, because I have some ethics about I fact check till I'm blue in the face, but I'll still try to make it interesting or compelling.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sorry I had that training, but this is a much more engaging kind of writing to be writing in the community on sustainability. So I do a lot of internet researching, and I'm in groups that are encouraging the linking of arts and environment and public engagement and education. So it works. It's a nice fit.
But just going back on what you were saying about growing up, you grew up in
Well, there's my mom's art on the wall. She's a printmaker.
Oh, right.
She studied under a Filipino, really the printmaker of the Philippines, Rodriguez. She wrote his biography when she was there with the UN. And she herself wrote 3 books. She struggled with her arts practice all through our teenage years, and my sister and I knew there was something here that we didn't understand.
Your mom's name?
Beatrice Harding. She was struggling to find that expression. She initially wanted to be a master clothes designer when she was a farm girl, and we found drawings that were quite superb. She became quite a seamstress in the Depression as a way to earn money. But she had her eyes on a New York design school when she was in Morden, Manitoba as a farm girl.
Wow.
And so she did sewing. She tried photography, she tried writing, and then she found printmaking through this mentoring with Rodriguez, the Filipino. And that became, you could tell, okay, that she's found her way of expression. And my sister and I always knew that she wasn't as passionate about being a mom.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Right.
My dad was probably nurtured more than my mom.
Wow.
And that was fine because you're still influenced and enriched by that once you figure it out. Sure. So the political side was strong through my father's work in the Medicare and the CCF, the co-ops, and then the UN. But this other influence has been as strong in the family, and there's artistic sort of sensibilities in both our sons because my mom's influence on them when they were kids. One's a musician, and the other is a marine biologist who wants to be a potter. Because he did some really interesting potting when he was little. But he is a marine biologist. But I mean, that doesn't mean he's not going to be working with his hands creatively. He's sort of working with them creatively when he's diving.
Right.
So that interaction. And in Regina, around that community of the progressives, who, really were the people who brought Medicare to Saskatchewan, there was a strong arts influence in that community. All these families that were around the progressives who were doing healthcare or other things around the CCF NDP, they were the ones who set up the European Film Club in Regina and brought in these incredible European films that we would see as teenagers. We'd never have seen these if they hadn't done that. So they were a and Florence James, of course, just enriched that circle of friends. And they were into dance, and they were multi-talented group of people. Some of the people who set up the Regina Dance Studio were around that circle. So, it's osmosis. You just pick it up. It's just a sensibility, and not polarizing art and politics, because it gets so polarized or reduced.
Yeah.
There's creativity that finds many ways. Curiosity and creativity find many ways to be expressed.
Right. In
conversation, in print, in paint, and there was no elitism in terms of form of art. Florence James was absolutely egalitarian about people finding their form of expression. She was heavily into theater, but if she saw people doing other things, she was like 100% go and do that.
This is the same Florence James that my first podcast guest, Gene Freeman, wrote about.
You're going to find Florence's influences through the whole province.
Right.
Because they ran those summer theater things before the summer school.
Right.
Arts Board moved around the province before they established the School of the Arts, so that many community theater groups formed under her influence and brought people out of the kind of woodwork into community creative networks. And those people did other things. They might do photography. It's a funny thing, because we see it in the Arts Centre. People will come in because they're interested in one thing because they think that's what they like.
Yeah.
They see something else and they realize and now they might start playing with photography.
Well, that is indeed what's so great about the Arts Centre, is that it will be multi-purpose.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of exposure to a lot of different art forms. It's so refreshing to hear. We spend so much time in the arts talking about what we're losing, what's disappearing. It's so refreshing to find out that there's new life springing up.
Well, and the way it happens will be different. The artists around my family that were practicing artists, if I think about them, a lot of them were very active in child education. Okay, so they were, arts practice was part of child development. Hopefully that continues, although there has been some losses. This time round, I'm seeing explorations across the colonial gap. I'm seeing fusion. You're starting to see integrated bands, native and non-native musicians, and you're seeing music that's got drum tempo, and the music my son plays has a bit of Spanish influence. It has some drum tempo, and has some punk rock in it. Something unique happens out of those relationships.
Does your son live here?
He's in Regina now, yeah.
Right. So he might have an opportunity to do some workshops at the Arts Centre.
Oh yeah, he's doing them at the Y right now.
But I mean here at the Arts Centre, yeah.
He could.
Great. Good.
He's doing some music-based workshops at the Y now as part of his job, where they use music to work with these street kids to get them expressing themselves.
Right.
And writing common songs, and it works.
Right.
You can start off, and then pretty soon you've got yourself in the recording room.
It's very therapeutic.
Take it all the way through.
Yeah.
And you transform how people no longer are bitter about somebody else having an advantage. They're actually celebrating.
Right.
You twist it. You turn it on its head. You don't change their stories. You don't tell them there's something wrong with their experience. It just, you transform the energy that's working with it into a binding creative energy.
Right.
It works.
Right.
It's called social therapy in the States.
Yeah. Right.
Because there's an arts movement in New York and Los Angeles and Atlanta that actually uses the arts, community arts, for community building around anti-violence campaigns.
There is great healing through art.
Yeah.
Great healing.
And so that side, so on the family side, my sister was a psychiatrist. She's now a retired psychiatrist who does community arts with kids that the system gave up on.
Wow.
And she's gone in and out of the New York Institute regularly, and her son is now one of the main activists in Atlanta in that Institute of Social Therapy. And she dragged me there once, just like my mom would. And it really had a profound effect on me, seeing how these things really did connect. How the arts, community building, the educational, the therapeutic, you could really pull these strands together. And that vision isn't necessarily shared across the board, although it's not articulated, but I think it is shared, because actually when the place is being used this way, everybody's feeling, hey, it's starting to happen.
Right.
Well, we have kids coming in. We walked in there one day and there were 20 kids active in this room doing stuff. The energy was like, wow, it really was worth rebuilding this room. Wow. Because they're not in school. Nothing wrong with school, but this is them really getting a chance to find what feels right when they express. And you could tell when you came in there that these kids were really, really engaged in their work, that they were doing. And the women who were running the thing are very good. We've got some very good, talented people in the community. So
that's a fantastic story.
Yeah. No, it's exciting.
I want to say thank you for our initial conversations by phone, for your suggestions to meet Doreen and Jack. I think we all agree that they were a fine representation of the history of this area. So
and you could keep going. If you stayed for a week, we'd go and see Hummer Bartlett, or we can't see Lynn Anderson because he's died, but he was a key person in linking arts and heritage, but it's the same story. It's the same story and a different voice, but
I'll consider that an invitation to come back.
Oh yeah.
Thanks for listening. The SaskScapes podcast is created by Kevin Power as part of the Culture Days Animateur program operated by Sask Culture. Funding to the cultural sector is provided through the Saskatchewan Lotteries Trust Fund for Sports, Culture, and Recreation. If you want to hear more of these podcasts, or to see the great work being done by other Sask Culture animateurs, please visit www.iheartculture.ca. Special thanks to Paved Arts in Saskatoon for their technical support. Music for SaskScapes is provided by Saskatchewan-born singer-songwriter Jeffrey Straker. There is no end to the stories to be told. So, until next time,